at Alabama. Those three guys each occupied a spot on the all, SEC preseason team at the end of media days last week. So those guys are the upper echelon, the top tier of quarterbacks in the SEC. You have the second tier, which is kind of that very guys that are already proven, very solid quarterbacks at their respective schools. That's your Brady Cooks at Missouri, your Jackson Darts in Mississippi, and then your guys like Graham Mertz at Florida. Like, these guys are good, solid quarterbacks that maybe aren't quite in that upper echelon, but could, if they take a step forward from where they were a year ago, could certainly enter that conversation by season's end. And then you have this area with a lot of just generally unproven guys up to this point. And there's always going to be those guys in any conference in college football, but it is interesting that there's such a high number of those guys up to this point as we enter 2024, and that includes Lenore Sellers here at South Carolina. That includes Nico at Tennessee, Jackson Arnold at Oklahoma, Garrett Nussmeier at LSU, Brock Vandegrift at Kentucky. These are all guys that, to a degree, we've seen in limited roles. Sellers got his opportunity to play in garbage time against teams that Carolina had already locked up wins against last year. Nico got to play in their bowl game against Iowa and looked fine there. Jackson Arnold got to play in Oklahoma's bowl game against Arizona and looked okay. Definitely not great, but was his first start. Garrett Nussmeier, we've seen come in for an injured Jaden Daniels a couple seasons ago and play sparingly. And I always go back to referencing, how he looked against Georgia's defense in the 2022 SEC championship game. Like, this guy's got some stuff to him. We just have not seen him in that consistent starting role up to this point. Brock Vandegrift, transferring over from Georgia, has played plenty of garbage time, moments in his time there for all the games that Georgia was winning pretty handily. But we don't definitively know what these guys are going to be, over the course of a full season, just because we've not seen a large enough sample size to form true opinions on them just yet. And the scary part, when you have one of these guys as the quarterback of your respective team, like we have here at South Carolina, is not really knowing if you can trust them. Again, we've seen the highlight tapes. We've talked about them ad nauseum for what they were as, recruits coming out of high school and comparisons to this guy and that guy and what their upside potential and all that kind of stuff is. But when you officially hand them the keys to your offense, you don't know. For every Trevor Lawrence that came in as a 5-star and billed to be the next Peyton Manning and looked the part in college and got drafted number 1 overall and is turning into having a fine career in the NFL as well, there have been just as many busts. I'll get into Jalen Hurts here in just a moment, but remember, Jalen Hurts went into Alabama not as a starting quarterback his freshman year. It was Blake Barnett, 5-star kid out of California, and he bounced around several different schools before just eventually retiring from the game of football, never even going to the NFL. So you just never know what's going to happen with these guys that are unproven at the college level up to this point. Chris Lowe of ESPN was on the postgame show with Jay and Elijah yesterday, and one of the questions I believe that Elijah posed to him was, out of all these unproven quarterbacks in the SEC, which of them are the most trustworthy? Cut number 5 here, Dave.
I think probably just from a pure arm talent standpoint, Iamaleava at Tennessee is probably the most talented. But, we other than the Iowa game, the bowl game last year, we haven't seen him play. Jackson Arnold played in the bowl game last year, made some mistakes for Oklahoma, but put up big numbers. I know, again, in talking to Shane and people around that program, they're really excited about what Sellers could do. I talked to a couple of the kids in Dallas, a couple of the players, and, his ability to run the football and extend plays and his arm strength. I think, was the other one LSU, Nussmeier? Is that who you mentioned?
Oh, I did not. We can throw LSU in there too.
Yeah, Kentucky. I think you said
Kentucky has a transfer, Vandegrift from Georgia, another guy who's going to be a first-year starter. So, listen, it's a quarterback's game now more than ever, and you got to have that guy that, especially at a school that doesn't have the kind of personnel that can line up and just knock you off football. Georgia, Alabama, Texas. You got to be able to find ways to move the ball, hit some explosive plays downfield, do some different types of things. And I think that's going to be critical for all those guys that we just mentioned. And how do they play around them? You look at Tennessee. Tennessee has lost some really good receivers the last few years. They feel like they have good depth at receiver, but I don't know that you point to any one guy on their roster and say he's Jalen Hyatt, or he's a breakout. He's one of the kids LSU had last year. So much of it is we talk about quarterbacks and the quarterback game, but how do you protect them? Can you take some pressure off that quarterback's shoulders by running the football some, especially in the red zone? And I think the third thing is, you've got to, you got to play well around them. Guys have got to make plays and catch a ball, out in space, break a tackle, turn a 7-8 yard gain into a 25-yard gain. And I think, Carolina's certainly got to be able to do more of that.
And a lot of really good points that he brings up there. And it's never easy to be a new starter, especially in the SEC on any given year. But perhaps this year is going to be more difficult than ever because the league got tougher, adding into high caliber, teams in Texas and Oklahoma, which everybody has to play as one of those. For a team like South Carolina, you're going on the road to Alabama, you're taking on Ole Miss, and something we haven't even really mentioned a whole lot in this offseason. 6 of South Carolina's opponents on their schedule, out of 12 teams, half of their schedule all features teams that were in the top 25 at the end of the college football, season last year. You know what I mean? So high caliber opponents on a week in, week out basis. And again, you're facing this murderer's row constantly, having to put out your best performance. That can be a lot for young guys. That, if you're not good between the ears, that can really rattle you. That can really affect you. And one thing that Chris Lowe brought up there at the very tail end of that, talking about receivers, you need some guys that can turn a 7-yard game into a 20 or 25-yard game, those kind of things. That's another element of this that is, I don't want to say concerning, but scary when it comes to a guy like Lenore Sellers, that you don't know what your wide receiving core is necessarily. Now, you brought in a lot of guys from different places with varying degrees of skill sets and stuff to fill out your room, but we're sitting here a little over a month away from the season. We don't know who wide receiver 1 is. We don't know who is going to be making a bulk of the receptions. And we have an idea, and we think it's going to work out okay, but we don't know that for sure. And when you have a unproven quarterback and doesn't have a complement of experienced wide receivers that he's as familiar with, guys that he's gotten to play with up to this point, that can cause some bumps in the road. I'm not going to say it's going to be a detriment all season long, but getting out of the gate in those first couple of games, there could be some things that you're still trying to work out, still trying to get that chemistry down in a game-like setting with guys that, again, for the most part, you weren't playing with a season ago. And I'm not saying all these things to deter you or say that I think Lenore Sellers is going to have a bad season. I think he's going to have a perfectly fine season, and I'm excited to see what he does finally getting the opportunity to start here at South Carolina. But there is reason, as always, whenever you're handing things over to a young guy, whether it be a true freshman, redshirt sophomore, whatever, there's always going to be those small bits of apprehension that do worry you about, hey, what if this guy isn't as good as we think he is? What if this guy isn't, our future at this spot? And we have to go back to the drawing board and figure something else out, in the middle of this year, after this year, or whatever it may be. Now, all that being said, I mentioned, the guys that we talk about being in the upper echelon of the conference as far as quarterbacks go, the Becks, the Ewers, the Milrose. Those guys kind of came into last year, and Ewers was more experienced. He had started the season before, but, these were guys that were coming into the past year or so without a lot of, knowledge about them. I mean, Carson Beck had been a long-time backup at Georgia behind Stetson Bennett, played in garbage time. And he even last year, it took a little while for him to evolve into what he was going to be, and turned out to be a great quarterback by the end of the season. But right out of the gate, he, took some time to kind of build that confidence. Jalen Milroe had been a guy that was on Alabama's bench for a couple seasons behind all the list of great quarterbacks they've had for these past handful of years. And never forget, he started out bad last year. I mean, he got benched after losing the game to Texas. He didn't play against South Florida, and Alabama struggled in that game, nearly lost that game. And again, Milroe, much like Carson Beck, got better as the season went along to where he was one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC by season's end, helping lead his team to the college football playoff. So again, this group of guys, Sellers, Nico, Arnold, Nussmeier, Vandegrift, these could all be the top shelf guys in the SEC come next year. There's the law of averages tell you that one or two of those guys may not be. We don't know who those guys are going to be necessarily, but it's something to see, what this new crop of quarterbacks is going to be to lead this conference for the next, handful of years. So again, I want to pose the question to you, and I'll get to some of these answers coming up here in just a few minutes. What does a successful season look like for you with Lenore Sellers? Now, again, that can be a stat line. It can be, I want to see him throw for X amount of yards, run for X amount of yards, have this many touchdowns, whatever it may be. It could be objectives. I want to see him win this game, and this game. It could be just certain traits like, hey, I want to see him thrive in, goal line situations or whatever it may be. Like, what does success look like for you when it comes to Lenore Sellers in his first year as South Carolina's quarterback? We'll get to some of those answers coming up in just a minute here. I do want to remind you once again, the best moment in Gamecock history since 2000 gets rolling starting this Monday. Going to be putting up some Twitter polls each day running through next Thursday. Going to give you 4 chances each day to vote on your favorite Gamecock moment that have happened since the year 2000. Take the 4 winners from week 1 and have another poll the following Monday, August 5th. That'll run for the week, and we'll announce a winner on August the 12th. It's all sponsored by our friends over at Columbia Craft at 520 Green Street down in the Vista. Your expectations and success for Lenore Sellers. What does that mean to you? Hit that coming up. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday on the game. Tyler Head here for Canty Foundation Specialist. If you're like me, you probably had a little bit of trouble getting to sleep last night because of the storms that were rolling through the Columbia and Lexington area. And it rained pretty hard as I woke up this morning and saw all the dampness on the ground. And if you experienced a storm like last night and you have a crawl space under your home, you might have some standing water under there. As I've talked about many times, that can lead to huge problems with the high humidity and condensation that can create things like mold, mildew, and pests, including things like termites in your crawl space. That moisture can also lead to wood rot and floor joist problems for your home as well. So if you're having any issues with your crawl space, you need to check out our friends at Canty Foundation Specialist. Go online to cantyconfaces.com and schedule an appointment today. They'll send out a professional to evaluate your home's crawl space and get you fixed up right so you and your family can live comfortably going forward. Again, go online, schedule an appointment today at cantyconfaces.com for our friends at Canty Foundation Specialist. Welcome back in. Extra Points out ahead with you on this Wednesday here on The Game, talking all things quarterback in the SEC, specifically focusing on our guy Lenore Sellers here at South Carolina and I say this, he has not officially been named the starter for this season. He's still just the starter coming out of the spring, but we all know that Lenore Sellers is going to be the starting quarterback. We're just waiting on Shane Beamer to give us the official word on that, which, I don't know, maybe he'll say that tomorrow at Birdies with Beamer. Probably not. It'll probably be something that happens over the course of fall camp. But technically speaking, Lenore Sellers has not been named the starter for the season, but I think we would all be extremely shocked if Robbie Ashford or Davis Bevel was the one taking the first snap of the season as opposed to Lenore Sellers. So we're just operating under the assumption that he's going to be the guy, and I think that's a pretty safe bet to assume that. So again, I asked the question to you to weigh in on the Firehouse Subs text line, 803-404-6100. What does a successful season look like to you for Lenore Sellers? And again, that can be stats, that can be certain moments in the season, that can be, traits of leadership or whatever it may be. Whatever your definition of success, I'm interested to know. We'll get to this one here. This is a bit of a long one, but I'll read it here because it is some good insight from Nameless Texter. Carolina football will be run heavy and probably too run heavy to be entertaining. Want Sellers to be successful, put up between 140, 150 passing yards per game with around 70 rushing yards as well. Offense work in concert with defense and shortening the game. So really only about 20 possessions per game, including the average instead of the average, which is around 26. That should keep SC in most games, but the running backs and offensive lines are so important in accomplishing that. Projected stats for Sellers: 1,800 passing yards, 13 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, 800 rushing yards, 12 touchdowns, and a 7-5 record. Honestly, if Sellers puts up that kind of stat line, I don't think there's many people that would be upset with that, to be completely honest with you. And I think that's a very realistic approach, and way to look at it. I think it's very easy to, throw gaudy numbers out there and like, oh, well, Sellers, if he throws for 3,000 yards and rushes for another 1,000 and is, on the stage up there in New York at the end of the season, that's a successful season. Yes, that'd be phenomenal, and that would be a Cam Newton type of year for Lenore Sellers that we would all certainly love to see. Is that realistic? I don't know. Maybe. But I'm not going to place that kind of lofty expectations on him right out of the gate. I want to kind of keep it a little bit more grounded at this point in time, in my personal opinion. So when I'm kind of gauging where Sellers could be, I went back and looked, and again, 4-star kid coming out of high school, and he drew a lot of comparisons to a Jalen Hurts as far as what his quarterback play would be. I'm looking at On3 here in his scouting report, and, they said he's got the athleticism and rushing ability and upside as a passer, very similar to Jalen Hurts, with maybe a little bit better of an arm. So it kind of poses the question, okay, well, if that's the case and they are very similar in size as well, what kind of freshman year did Jalen Hurts have when he was at Alabama in 2016? Threw for 2,780 yards, 23 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, completed 62.8% of his passes, ran for another 954 and 13 touchdowns. Now, if Sellers did that, this team is going to be phenomenal. I think we do have to taper expectations a little bit because that was a team that played for a national championship. He had guys like Calvin Ridley and O.J. Howard and just super duper stars at the college level playing around him. And Sellers doesn't quite have the same lineup around him, so I think you do have to temper those expectations a little bit. But if he could throw somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 yards, Nameless Texter had about 1,800 yards there, maybe a little bit higher, but anywhere in that realm of maybe 15 to 18 touchdowns through the air, keep the interceptions to a single digits, then run for another 700 or 800 yards and have maybe anywhere between 8 or 10 touchdowns on the ground. Like, that would be a very respectable and solid redshirt freshman season for Lenore Sellers, and that would probably mean that the offense is going to be pretty successful as well. And the texter also brings up a really good point that, the running backs in the offensive line are going to be very important in accomplishing that. He is going to need the help from the guys around him. That's goes without saying, obviously. But, the offensive line, needs to protect him, needs to open up holes, because if you have a running quarterback that is going to, try and get a couple 100 yards, it could be in that area, pushing towards 1,000, you got to be able to block for him. And that's going to be something that I think a lot of us are holding our breath on until we see it actually happen. Bubba weighs in just kind of specifically here saying 7 wins. If Lenore Sellers can help this team get to 7 wins, which would include getting back to a bowl game, that would be successful. And I think that's perfectly fine. When you have a down year like Carolina had a year ago, you don't care how pretty it is. You just want to see your team get back to being in a bowl game, get back to 6, 7 wins, whatever it may be. And if that means that Lenore Sellers goes out there and has a Cam Newton type of year, well, that's great. If that means that he's a game manager quarterback that's just doing what's asked of him and not that much more, then as long as the team's winning, then, if you're okay with that too, that's perfectly fine. I think he's going to be certainly more than a game manager quarterback. And I think he has the athleticism and the skill set to do a lot of really, really impressive things. But again, teach their own for what that level of success is, for Sellers this upcoming year. And we saw last year, in the limited amount of time that we got to see him play, he showed those flashes of everything that you heard of him coming out of high school. That athleticism, his ability to run, his ability to, throw the ball deep, had that long touchdown pass to Tyshawn Russell in the in the game against Furman, traveled basically 50 yards in the air on that one and delivered pretty much a perfect dime. The rushing touchdown he had against Vanderbilt. Now, yes, that wasn't exactly what the play design was, but it allowed us to see that speed and athleticism on display over the course of a longer play, which got a lot of people very, very excited. So if those small sample sizes are any indication of what he can bring to the table for South Carolina this year, I think they're going to be in for hopefully a very good year and hopefully a very successful year for Lenore Sellers as well. I'll try and get back to these a little bit more. I got a lot more of you weighing in on the Firehouse Subs text line 803-404-6100. But it is Wednesday. That means we got to talk to our guy Dimitri Ravanos coming up next, as we'll dive into the conversation around the ACC and them needing their own Paul Feinbaum. We'll get to that coming up next, but I do want to remind you once again, the Ultimate Season Ticket makes its return starting next Monday, July the 29th. One winner will get season tickets to all South Carolina home football, baseball, women's, and men's basketball games for the 2024-2025 calendar sports year. Listeners will register by going to 1075thegame.com, just like last year. Got to announce 3 finalists that will come out to our summer golf tournament at the Charwood Golf Club in West Columbia, where we will announce a winner there. This is all sponsored by the Men's Clinic and the Road Professional Center. Again, the Ultimate Season Ticket giveaway starting on Monday, July the 29th. Dimitri Ravanos coming up next on the Extra Point here on the game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday here on The Game, as we do each and every Wednesday. Check out the guy, Dimitri Ravenos, see what's going on in the sports world. And Dimitri, I start today by posing the question to you. When was the last time you spent any time watching the ACC network?
Oh, man, I think that a few years ago, like maybe 3 years ago, they had a game kick off at 11:30 as opposed to noon on a Saturday. So that was probably it.
Okay, so it was for the purpose of watching a game, but have you ever spent any time tuning into their original programming or anything of the sort like that?
So when they launched, they had the show with Wes Durham and Mark Packer, and both of those guys are friends of mine. So I did give it a whirl, but we are talking the very early days of the network. So like to sit here and try to convince you that I am a loyal viewer of all things ACC network would be an absolute lie.
Well, the ACC network is approaching its 5th birthday. It started back in 2019 as kind of at the crux of the matter for this whole Florida State and Clemson debacle that's going on with the ACC right now. But I, like you, have not spent much time watching original programming on the ACC network, and in fact was curious, what exactly do they have on the network now? And this week's a little different because they have media days, so they have coverage up in Charlotte going on throughout the day. But I fast forwarded to Friday to look to see what their lineup is. And if you're interested in rewatching bowl games from last year, they got you covered, as well as, documenting the 1981 Clemson National Championship football team. But as far as wall-to-wall coverage of what's happening today in, modern college football, not a whole lot to write home about. This has seemingly become the network of replaying old games to watch during the offseason.
Yeah, and look, I mean, there is something to be said for, like, does the SEC network really need, like the Marty and McGee's and whatever the restaurant show they have is. Like, there's an argument to be made that maybe the SEC network is spending too much because not enough people are watching those things anyway. But, look, I'll say about the ACC network what I have said for years. And remember, I live right in the heart of ACC country. The reason that the SEC network works is that, look, I know there are all different types of South, right? South Carolina South is not the same as Alabama South, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes to sports, we function as a monolith. This is the thing that we all coalesce around. That's not true in the ACC, right? Like, Boston is very different from Raleigh, North Carolina, and yet Boston College and NC State are equal members of that conference. You cannot build a network, a television network around ACC sports and think it will have mass appeal.
Well, and the reason we're talking about this goes back to, and 24/7 brought this up in an article the other day that goes back to a Dabo quote from a couple years ago in reference to, the ACC network and basically saying, why the blank don't we have a Feinbaum show, with the implication being that, why isn't there a central figure that's pushing the stories of this conference that's getting more national attention, much like the Feinbaum show does on a daily basis on the SEC network. But I listened to a clip of a podcast that you were on the other day talking about this, and as you kind of mentioned there, it's an apples to oranges comparison when you talk about the passion of, sports in general in the SEC compared to what you have now spread across the entire country in the ACC, that it just wouldn't really work with something like that.
Yeah, and also, I mean, there is like a real oversight on Dabo's part or any of the coaches' part that are talking about needing a ACC Feinbaum, because both Jeff Brom from Louisville and Bill O'Brien at Boston College were quoted in this article as saying essentially the same thing, that's what the conference needs. Like, they're all overlooking that Feinbaum was on for 11 years before anybody outside of Alabama knew who he was. Like, he was building up his reputation and contact with the people that he was going to be covering. Like, you can't just build that from scratch. And as you said, now this conference stretches across the country. We used to have a guy here in Raleigh named David Glenn that was a bit of a water carrier for every program in the ACC. But, David Glenn is 60-something years old at this point. You're not starting something brand new with that guy. And, by the way, I would venture a guess that everybody listening in the state of South Carolina, a state that does matter to the ACC, probably just heard that name for the first time when I said it. It's not the same as what Paul Feinbaum was to SEC fans.
Well, and as you mentioned a moment ago, for the first couple of years of the SEC network, they did have, Packer and Durham, Mark Packer and Wes Durham, and I'm a big fan of Wes Durham, the voice of the Atlanta Falcons, and obviously very ingrained in the culture of, ACC sports in general. And that show was on for, 2-3 years, and it never gained nearly the foothold of what Feinbaum did, and they were on for 1,000 some odd episodes before they got canceled a couple years back. But again, it just didn't quite have that pull in that audience, despite the fact those guys are very insightful and very knowledgeable about the history of ACC sports, and obviously still on top of what's happening today as well. But it just didn't have that, appeal that a Feinbaum show does have.
Yeah, and that's a really good example, Tyler, of why this is such a tall order for the ACC. Not only are Mark Packer and Wes Durham really good at what they do, their fathers were Billy Packer and Woody Durham, respectively. Those are two guys that ACC, particularly ACC basketball fans, know and worship. And if those two guys, if Wes and Mark couldn't make it work in the way that these coaches are saying it needed to, then who can? And so, as much as these coaches, and I get why the coaches want somebody that is tooting the horn all the time, I do think that there is something to be said for doing some introspection, right? And wondering, if you have somebody that every day is pounding the chest of, Pitt basketball, do you think that even Pitt fans are watching that? I would venture a guess they probably aren't. I mean, there are just too many brands that do not matter in that conference, and there are too many brands where either they are second run to the SEC brand in their state, or, and this is probably the ACC's bigger problem, pro sports overshadow any attention they would get otherwise. I was talking to some friends that are in Charlotte this week for ACC Media Days, and they can't find anybody that is there to cover SMU. And why would they be? Any football attention in Dallas is being paid to the Cowboys.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And especially now as you get into these expanded markets in places like California that I don't even think half the people at Stanford know they have a football team at this point in time, much less, right. out at Cal Berkeley. And that passion and lack thereof is a reason why something like this doesn't quite work in the ACC. And again, you being from Alabama, you can speak to this on a deeper level. A part of the appeal to the Feinbaum show is that kind of, trash TV Jerry Springer aspect of it, where you have, Jim Bob from Dothan arguing with Phyllis from Mobile about, the Iron Bowl every other day on the Feinbaum show. There's that aspect of it that just draws people in because you get to see, the lower rung of people, I guess, in the SEC fan base just yell at each other for an hour each day.
Well, first of all, Tyler, Phyllis was from Mulga. May she rest in peace.
My apologies.
Secondly, I wouldn't so much say it is the trash TV Jerry Springer element as much as it is let's be honest, the SEC network is state TV, right? Mm-hmm. It is no different than North Korea controlling all of the coverage of Kim Jong-un. However, Feinbaum offers the people watching an unfiltered look at who is really day-to-day talking about this conference. That has always been the appeal of Paul Feinbaum. And are they putting on a bit of a character to, make sure their calls are answered every time they call in? Absolutely. But those of us watching or listening are there to be entertained, and they are doing the job. And here's the thing that, as I've gotten to know Paul, something that I've come to believe is 100% true. Those people may be putting on a character, but they believe everything they are saying.
Sure.
They live and die with Alabama, Auburn, or as the show has grown, other fan bases around the country. Very much the way they are portraying. And I just don't know that outside of Florida State, Clemson, maybe NC State, and then, you have a few others come basketball season. I just don't know that enough of those people exist to create that kind of environment for a show on the ACC network.
Yeah, I think the Duke-North Carolina basketball rivalry is probably the closest you would get in terms of a heated back and forth, but even that would pale in comparison.
Here's the thing, living in the Triangle here in North Carolina. Certainly North Carolina has those people.
Sure.
Duke fans don't really live here. Duke fans come here, they go to school here, and then they go back to New Jersey. So is there any real possibility that the ACC network is going to even be distributed to Duke fans? I don't know.
That's a really good point, yeah. And I don't know. I think is there maybe more of an elitist mindset within the Duke fan base that wouldn't stoop as low to arguing on, a call-in television show with North Carolina fans?
Oh, absolutely. Like, they would tell you, whether it is true or not, they would tell you that that is time wasted that they could be spending, looking at their investments. Whether or not they actually have them, who knows? But I lived in Durham when I first moved to North Carolina, not far from the Duke campus, and there were more Appalachian state flags in my neighborhood than Duke flags.
That's pretty funny. I don't see the ACC ever finding a foothold with Feinbaum anytime soon, as their network seems to continue to fledge for, however many years to come, while they at least have that grant of rights locked in through 2036, which is keeping Florida State and Clemson in the conference for the time being. Dimitri's also informed me he has very passionate takes on the Untold documentary, on Netflix. We'll get to some of those next to wrap up to the first hour of the Extra Point. It is Wednesday. I'm Tyler Head. He's Dimitri Ravenos on the game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on your Wednesday. Dimitri Ravenos joining me on the Love Chevrolet phone lines as he does each and every Wednesday. And Terry and I talked about this a little bit yesterday. The next set of Untold documentaries on Netflix getting set to come out, I believe, next month. And one of those is going to be the story of Connor Stallions and the sign-stealing investigation at the University of Michigan, which is something we were all enthralled with as it was going on a year ago. And Dimitri, I'm honestly set up to be very disappointed by this documentary leaving out about half of the details of it as it should when it finally comes out.
So here's the thing. Everything we learned about Connor Stallions, like certainly he wants credit for everything that was done, right? So
Sure.
From that standpoint, I think there is reason to be optimistic. This might be pretty good. But the other thing we learned about Connor Stallions is he would rather protect Michigan than himself. So we are never going to hear about how much, especially Sharon Moore, knew about what was going on. I mean, you cannot tell me that sign stealing did not benefit the two Michigan coordinators last year. Like, you cannot convince me they did not know what was going on. I could believe Jim Harbaugh didn't know, but not the coordinators. That's insane.
Well, and as we've seen with prior documentaries on Untold, everybody references Swamp Kings, and that's my number one of being severely disappointed because you had so much meat on the bone for those, you know, 06 to 08 Florida teams and, the Hernandez, the Pouncey twins, Riley Cooper, Tim Tebow, and they just went completely surface level and made it into like this puff piece of almost making Urban Meyer try to look like a good guy.
Yeah, welcome to sports documentaries, Tyler, in the years after The Last Dance. I mean, this is what happened. I would argue that as open as Johnny Manziel was, the Manziel one was kind of surface level, like look at everything that was done to me as opposed to what I did. I think that from the moment The Last Dance was a hit, everybody thought the formula was just get the key figure to participate. Give up whatever sort of journalism we expect from something labeled as a documentary in order to get them to participate. And that is why you have Derek Jeter producing his own documentary for ESPN, David Beckham producing his own documentary for Netflix. I mean, look, as somebody that really does like movies and documentaries and stories, like I just don't see any value in a lot of these. And I think, unfortunately for Netflix, like Untold has become the face of this. And honestly, whenever somebody says to me that, when Netflix decides to get involved with sports, the game is going to change in sports media,
Sure.
I always point to Untold and say, what evidence is there that they're any good at it?
See, I think we need Vice TV to start doing these kind of documentaries. They'll unearth all the real dirt.
Listen, I am a devotee of the Dark Side of series on Vice TV. Dark Side of the Ring, Dark Side of Comedy, Dark Side of the 90s, you name it, buddy, I'm in.
So if Untold were to get their stuff together and actually put, full effort into these documentaries, I thought of a couple of different ones that I would like to see get made sometime in the next couple of years. I think we definitely have to dive into the collapse of the Pac-12 and everything that went down last year alone and seeing that conference basically go underwater. Personal one for you here, Mike Price and the domino effect of Alabama football. I think that's something that could be multi-parter there.
I'm going to give you a bigger one than that because I think the incompetence with which that program was managed between Stallings and Saban would be really interesting to even people that are not Alabama fans.
Would we call that the dark years of Bama?
Yeah, Dimitri Goes to College could be the name of those.
So you were not there at the right time then?
No. Everything that happened under Nick Saban was owed to me for the 4 years I did spend there.
And then my last suggestion is Ed Orgeron and him flaming out after winning the national championship.
Yeah, Orgeron would be a really interesting one. I think you might even be able to rewind that back to the waning days of Les Miles because you think about, like, they were ready to fire that dude. He wins what is essentially a meaningless game against A&M, and they feel like they have to keep him, goes to Lambeau Field, loses to Wisconsin, and all of a sudden it's just a done deal, right? Like, I think that would be a really interesting one. I also think that along the lines of coaches getting fired, this one came up last week at SEC Media Days, but I'd love to hear or to see sort of a what in journalism you call it a TikTok, like literally a blow-by-blow, play-by-play, minute-by-minute of what it was that finally locked in USC brass to firing Lane Kiffin.
I think just the Lane Kiffin story as a whole, and again, it's far from being completed, but a multi-parter just on what's happened in the first, 20-ish years of his coaching career up to this point, I think would be highly entertaining.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, his dad passed away a couple of weeks ago. I know his dad's story is only like a toe in the water for college football. Most of it was in the NFL. But, you want to talk about like a how-to guide of how we got from old school defense to here. You could focus that whole thing on Monty Kiffin.
Yeah, absolutely. And, obviously Lane still, finally seeming to find his footing as a head coach now at Ole Miss. And they're a team that, many expect, including myself, to be in the mix for the college football playoff this year. But nevertheless, he has never failed to entertain us with his on and off the field antics up to this point.
No, for sure. And I guess off-the-field antics that might be interesting, if we could get a documentary and get people, namely the yellow fella, Jimmy Rain of Yellowwood, to go on the record about what happened when, in 2003, when Auburn is secretly flying boosters up to meet with Bobby Petrino to fire Tommy Tupperville. And then all of a sudden Tupperville turns in the best season in program history. Like, I would love to see that.
The Bobby Petrino story would rival in runtime the Star Wars, runtime of the movies they put together at this point.
I've thought about this a lot as it relates to the idea of Bobby Petrino being a pariah. Does he have a great story, or does he just have great moments?
That is a debate we don't have time for as this segment is running out, but we can readdress that at a different time. Appreciate it as always, Dimitri. We'll talk to you next week. All right, that's hour number one of the Extra Point. Coming up next, we'll dive into Ryan Day and the pressure on him in 2024 at Ohio State. That's next here on The Game. 10 o'clock, hour number 2. It is the Extra Point here on the game. Tyler Head along with you here on this Wednesday as we're wrapping up the month of July. Media Day is ongoing for both the Big Ten as well as the ACC. Yesterday, Big Ten Media Day is getting kicked off up there in Indianapolis. Tony Petitti taking the stage. To start things off yesterday morning, and to no surprise, he said something similar to what Greg Sankey said at SEC Media Days last week, that, hey, we're focused on what we have right now, not really looking in to anything expansion-wise. So a little wink-wink at what's going on down in, the ACC with Florida State and Clemson. And again, I don't think that Florida State and Clemson are going to be able to get out of the ACC, but even if they did, then their best bet is going to be to go to the Big 12, because the Big 10 and the SEC are not interested right now, as they are focusing on the task at hand of adding the teams they have added to the conference and seeing what happens from there. And by the way, Petitti made sure to mention that the 4 schools that were coming into the Big Ten this year were all AAU accredited universities, which Clemson and Florida State are not, and that is often the standard when it comes to allowing teams into the Big Ten. But, one of the bigger stories coming away from yesterday was the conversation around Ryan Day, head coach at Ohio State. We talk so much about, like, Coach Beamer here at South Carolina, and the expectations going into this year and the pressure for South Carolina just to get back to a bowl game, to where he's not on the hot seat entering 2025. And that stems from the fact that South Carolina had a disappointing year last year, missed a bowl game, went 5-7, the whole 9 yards that we've talked about. But I don't think there's anybody in the country that is facing more pressure than what Ryan Day is facing at Ohio State. And when you look at Ryan Day's, record and what he's accomplished at Ohio State up to this point, I mean, it's truly second to none. I mean, he has done everything but win a national championship up to this point, to where at most programs, that what he's done would say, man, we're going to keep this guy around forever no matter what happens. But at Ohio State, the expectations are always insanely, insanely high. And once again, going into this year, he's going to have to live up to those. Let's go with cut number 8 here, Dave. This is Ryan Day on the high expectations that people have for this program entering 2024.
Our focus is on this preseason. It's the next step. And, sure, a lot of coaches will say it. You can't really, focus on what happened the year before. You can't get too worried about what's coming down the road. But we all know there's a lot of, noise and a lot of hype around this team. And what we can't do is, let those distractions, grab our focus from what we need to do day in and day out. We know it's going to be a long season, but we got to have a great preseason. We got to have a physical preseason. We got to lay that foundation for what's going to come as we head throughout the season. But we're very, very excited about our guys. We have great experience in that locker room and some great talent. But it's going to take more than talent. It's going to take all the no talent issues to get to where we want to be and reach our goals.
And, we talk about high expectations at Ohio State so much, it almost kind of becomes cliche up to this point. But I think it's important to really look back on just how successful Ohio State has been, not in their entire tenure. Let's just talk about the past 2 decades. So since 2005, that's 19 seasons up to this point, Ohio State has had 17 double-digit wins a year. 2011 was the only time when they had more than 2 regular season losses. That was when Luke Fickell was there, and he only lasted a year. They've been to the college football playoff 5 times. They've had 4 national championship appearances, winning one of those back in 2014. And really, when you look at it, they're second only to Alabama in the past decade plus when it comes to prolonged expectations each and every year. And when you look at them this year, I think the bare minimum expectation is to get back to the national championship game, not to make the playoff, not to, get the quarterfinals or get to the semifinals. But this team, with what their roster is specifically, really has no excuse to not be playing for a national championship in mid-January when the season's ending. They bring back Travion Henderson. They bring back Emeka Ibuka, who could have gone to the NFL. They returned most of their starters on defense as well. And the big story about them this offseason was what they did in the transfer portal. Ryan Day went out there and rounded up people for the collective to make sure They had the money to go out there and buy the best team in college football in 2024, and they may very, very well did it. Will Howard comes over from Kansas State as to play quarterback. Quinshon Judkins, the best running back in the SEC the past couple of years, comes in to complement Travion Henderson in the backfield there. They got Caleb Downs, the best freshman defensive player in the entire country a season ago, from Alabama to come play safety for them. Like, this team is loaded to the gills. And again, anything less than making to the national championship game, I think, is going to be a failure. As well, along the way, they got to figure out how to beat Michigan. The one thing that has been Ryan Day's Achilles heel these past couple of years is not being able to beat that team from up north, the most hated rival that Ohio State has. 3 years in a row, they, for the most part, looked like they didn't belong in the same league as Michigan. Cut number 10 here, Dave. This is Ryan Day talking at Media Days yesterday on that losing streak versus the Wolverines.
One of the biggest, struggles that we have is that, when you lose a game like that, you have to wait a whole nother year to get back into that game. And, for our guys who decided to come back, we had about 12 guys that made the decision to come back. That was one of the big reasons why they decided to come back. But what we have to do is build every day and grow every day and count on the work that we're doing on a daily basis that's going to matter as we get to the end of the season. And, what we can't do is get too far ahead of ourselves and start to focus too much on that and get distracted. That's just the bottom line. But when you come to Ohio State, you got to win that game.
Ryan Day, in his tenure at Ohio State, and when he was talking on ESPN yesterday, they actually had a little graphic at the bottom. I believe 40-0 versus teams not named Michigan in his time at Ohio State as far as like Big Ten regular season goes. Like, this guy has beaten everybody and even beat Michigan for the first couple of years as a head coach, to the point, and you may have forgotten this, they were ready to fire Jim Harbaugh at the end of 2020. Now, that game, the year the game didn't get played because of COVID stuff, but he had beaten Harbaugh in 18. He had beaten Harbaugh in 19, and everything looked like they were getting ready to move on from Harbaugh and go with somebody else at Michigan. They restructured things. Harbaugh took a pay cut, and since then, Michigan has been on a tear, winning 3 in a row. Obviously, they made it to the college football playoff, won the national championship this past year, and despite all the success that Ohio State's had in that same time, including a couple of college football playoff appearances themselves, everybody just looks and says, well, yeah, but you're not beating that team from up north. You're not beating our biggest rival. That's unacceptable in the eyes of Ohio State people, because that was a game that I mentioned all the success Ohio State's had in the past 2 decades. Most of that has revolved around dominating the Michigan rivalry. It's since the mid-2000s, it seems like Michigan could not get one over on Ohio State. And now it's flipped in the other direction. Paul Feinbaum was on First Take yesterday after hearing those comments from Ryan Day talking about the losing streak versus Michigan, and he didn't mince words on his thoughts on what could happen to Ryan Day if that game goes sideways for a 4th year in a row. Cut number 11 here, Dave.
Molly, I have no idea what he's talking about. I mean, he's lost that game 3 years in a row, and he's talking about how his players are motivated to come back and play. Well, I heard that 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and last year, and you stunk in all 3 games. I mean, what are you talking about? And here's the problem with talking about Ryan Day. You look at his record, and I'm sure Doggy will quote it, and Stephen A. will quote it. It's gaudy. Nobody has a record like him, except you can't choke the biggest game of the year. And to me, if he can't beat Michigan this year, when he's got probably the best team in the country along with Georgia, after Harbaugh leaves, after all those great players depart, after a national championship, he ought to be gone. I mean, that is, it's simple as that. That's the biggest game of the year in the Big Ten, and I realize that Ohio State played for a national championship a couple of years ago against Alabama. Well, only lost by 28 points. They've been to the playoffs, but that program hasn't won a national championship since 2014 when Urban Meyer was there. So quit making excuses, Ryan Day. Quit acting like your players have given up something to come back. 3 years ago they came back, 2 years ago they came back, and 1 year ago they came back, and it's been the same result. Versus the last 3 games against Michigan.
Should a fan base want to fire a coach that has gone 56-8, has made multiple college football playoff appearances, played for a national championship, won 2 Big Ten titles. Should any fan base be pushing for a new coach with all the success that that coach has had? Absolutely not. Are the Ohio State fans and the people involved in the Athletic Association up there crazy enough to move on from him if they lost to Michigan for a 4th year in a row and didn't get to the national championship game? I 100% think that that could actually happen. Should it? No. But could it? Definitely so. Because, and especially this year, because again, Jim Harbaugh is a phenomenal football coach. One of the best football minds there is today. There's a reason why he's had success at the college and pro level, something that not a lot of people can say that they've done. So, not to say it's inexcusable, but you say, okay, I can see Jim Harbaugh out coaching Ryan Day. But Sharon Moore, who's now taking over the program, which, by the way, Sharon Moore was the coach of this game last year. Harbaugh had the game plan and was on the bus leading up to the start of the game until we found out he wasn't going to allowed to be in the stadium. So that was still a Jim Harbaugh team for the most part. But this year, especially when you look at what Michigan's lost from that national championship team, not only with the players on the field, but also with Harbaugh at the helm, there is no excuse at all for Ohio State to lose this game. And if they do, especially if they lose this game, because they can still go 11-1 and lose this game, make the Big Ten championship, win that, and still make the college football playoff or whatever it may be, or maybe lose the Big Ten championship game. I don't know. But if they lose the Michigan game and they get bounced anywhere before the national championship, especially with what they have on this roster, like I talked about a moment ago, I'm just saying, I would not sit here with my mouth open in shock if the conversation about moving on from Ryan Day became a real thing up there in Columbus. That's what the expectation is for that program, especially if you can't figure out how to beat your biggest rival for 4 years in a row. So that game, already very important, I think takes on an even greater importance this year with that being on the line for Ryan Day. Want to let you know, remind you once again, Game and Hardee's teaming up to make sure school students in the Richland 1 and Richland 2 school districts have all the supplies they need for the upcoming school year. You can help by donating any supplies that you have this Saturday between 2 and 4 p.m. at the Hardee's at 3852 Rosewood Drive from 2 until 4 p.m. I'm going to be out there hanging out. Come by, see me, bring some of that school supplies, and if the first 100 people to donate receive a coupon for a 3-piece chicken strip meal from Hardee's. Again, 3852 Rosewood Drive from 2 until 4 p.m. this Saturday. Come by, hang out with me, and we'll have a good time out there at Hardee's on Rosewood Drive. Speaking of roses, the Rose Bowl, once again, trying to throw its weight around when it comes to the college football playoff. We'll dive into that coming up. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on this Wednesday here on The Game. Welcome back in, Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. Appreciate everybody checking us out on the Game TV, sponsored by our friends at Shepherd's Glass and powered by Integrated Media. You can watch us all day long on Game TV. Just go to youtube.com, search the Game TV, and keep us locked in all day long. We're getting set for a new era of college football with the advent of a 12-team playoff for this upcoming year, and it's a radical shift from what we've had for so many years, whether it be the BCS National Championship game or the 4-team college football playoff, which was essentially just a +1 system. We're adding 8 new teams into the fold, as well as adding more rounds, 2 more rounds specifically, to how we determine the national champion in college football. And with this multi-round format now, we have quarterfinals and semifinals that are taking place at bowl games. Why? Because bowls are traditional to college football, and there's a lot of money tied up in them, so we can't just get rid of them, which means when you're tuning in for the quarterfinal games on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, you're going to watch one at the Fiesta Bowl, one at the Peach Bowl, one at the Rose Bowl, and one at the Sugar Bowl. And then a week later on January the 9th, and then January the 10th, you're going to watch semifinal games at the Orange Bowl as well as the Cotton Bowl. And with the way that the new college football playoff is structured, the 6, what we deemed as New Year's 6 games, are set to rotate through being quarters and semifinals. So you'll spend 2 years as a quarterfinal game, and then in that third year, you would get to be a semifinal game and then revert back and continue to go through that cycle, moving the 2 games on a yearly basis, as they did with semifinal rotation before the playoff expanded. With the way it was currently laid out, the Rose Bowl was set to become a semifinal game for the 2026-2027 college football season. With the way it's structured right now, that would mean that the Rose Bowl in 2027 would take place somewhere around January 7th or January the 8th. Obviously a far cry from its traditional New Year's Day slot. But maybe now that won't happen. Leaders with the Rose Bowl are pushing for the college football playoff to help them maintain their January 1st date, as well as their 5 o'clock Eastern time, 2 o'clock local time kick out there in Pasadena. Now, this doesn't surprise me at all. The Rose Bowl, in the history of college football, especially when it comes to championship formats, is always going against the grain. So when you go back to the early 90s, when you had the Bowl Coalition, the Bowl Alliance, the Rose Bowl refused to join because they didn't want to upset the prestige of what their game meant, which prevented multiple opportunities to match up number 1 and number 2 for the national championship. They almost didn't want to join the BCS back in the day because, again, they didn't want to ruin the integrity of what the Rose Bowl was. So we almost missed out on that when it came to determining national championships. They're also the reason, while being a part of the college football playoff for the past decade, that the Sugar Bowl semifinal games don't kick off until like 9:30 because they refuse to give up that traditional 5 o'clock start on the East Coast. So that's why we were watching Texas and Washington play until 1:30 in the morning last year because of the stupid Rose Bowl, right? Well, the Rose Bowl is once again trying to flex this muscle, saying, well, we don't care about the rotation. We want to maintain our traditional January 1st slot, which is more about the Rose Bowl Tournament of Roses parade than it is about the actual football game itself. It's so funny to me because bowls are devalued, right? Like we can all agree with that. Bowls do not mean in any sense what they once meant, 15, 20, 30 some odd years ago. And the only reason these big bowl games have mattered in the past decade is when they're a part of college football playoff semifinals, because they're a vessel of getting towards the national championship. It's not the prestige of, oh man, we won the Sugar Bowl. No, we won a semifinal game and we're getting to go play for the national championship. Yeah, the Rose Bowl maybe had a little bit more prestige than some of the other ones, but still, the college football playoff has completely de-emphasized what bowls used to mean. So this idea of hanging on to this tradition doesn't really make as much sense to me in today's age, especially considering the fact that as a quarterfinal, you're even deemed a less valuable bowl than the ones that become semifinals. You know what I mean? So this year, while yes, still important, the Orange Bowl and Cotton Bowl are more important than the Rose Bowl because they're semifinals. You win that game, you go to the national championship because of where they sit within the structure of what the 12-team format is. So as the Rose Bowl, if you are requesting to never move off of January 1st, that means you will forever be a quarterfinal game, which means that your prestige will always be just the middle round of the college football playoff. You will not be that final or that next to last step getting to the national championship. Again, the bowls still don't mean as much as what they used to, but at least in this instance, being a semifinal game holds a little bit more weight than being a quarterfinal game because you're that next step on the ladder to get to the college football playoff. So why, in my opinion, the Rose Bowl, who is worried so much about its tradition and sanctity, why would they willingly subject themselves to being viewed as a lesser bowl every single year guaranteed because they're always going to be a quarterfinal? And with the way, and I know we're going to expand to 14 or 16 and stuff like that in the near future, this part of the format is unlikely to change. You're still going to have quarterfinal games on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day with the semifinals, that next week in January and the national championship, later in the month of January because they don't want to continue to push in to, the NFL schedule. So the Rose Bowl is literally subjecting itself to being out of the New Year's 6 games, one of the lower end in terms of value because you're just a quarterfinal instead of a semifinal. That doesn't make sense to me. But again, it's this elitist mindset when it comes to the Rose Bowl that they think they're far and above everyone else. And yeah, for a long time, was that true? Probably. It was the granddaddy of them all, the bowl game of all bowl games. But in today's world of college football, it does not mean the same thing. And again, I would much rather see them just fall into form with everybody else and say, all right, we're part of this rotation. If that means every 3 years we got to play a Rose Bowl on January the 7th, then so be it, because we want to be part of that semifinal rotation. Now this also throws off the whole cycle of things because that means you're going to throw off the balance of these other bowl games having to pick up the slack of not having the Rose Bowl be in that rotation of being a semifinal game. How does that work out? I don't know. College football playoff has to decide what they're going to do with that. But the Rose Bowl, people at the Rose Bowl did think they were very confident that this was going to be granted to them. And again, that just subjects them to being a quarterfinal game going forward and nothing more than that. It's great that you're a part of the college football playoff, and there is some prestige to that. But again, when you're only being a quarterfinal game as opposed to getting to rotate into a semifinal game, I think that hurts the value of what the Rose Bowl, is to this point. So we'll see if the college football playoff grants them that. Again, it seems like very likely that's going to be the case. So we'll see, when that decision is finally made. It is Wednesday. That means we've got to talk a little bit of racing with Jen Jensen from the early game. We'll hit that coming up next. The Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday here on the game.
it's for sure up there. Like you mentioned, this is just such a prestigious place and such hallowed ground, and pretty neat to just get an opportunity to race here on the oval again. And what a job by our team. I mean, never gave up at all. And we had the pit stop issue there early on, and just fought and dug and had things work out. So all the fans too. I love you, Indiana fans. And I know you guys love me too. So how about we come back next May and try and kiss these bricks on the IndyCar?
Welcome back in. It's the Extra Point. Tyler Head, Jen Jensen joining me as she does each and every Wednesday. Talk a little bit of racing here. That was Kyle Larson after winning the Brickyard 400 on Sunday at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, celebrating the win and maybe already kind of calling a shot for the Indy 500 next year, where we know there is a deal in place for him to run the Indy 500 again. We haven't gotten all the confirmation on that, but sounds like he's ready and raring to go for another shot.
And I am so ready to watch him. I felt like it was almost a little bit of vindication, like everything that could have gone against him did when he did the double. So you knew he seems to really get the track, and so seeing him actually be able to win, despite Blaney's frustrations, we'll get to that I'm sure in a second, but it was really fun to actually see him get that victory and kiss the bricks.
And the best part of any Kyle Larson win is, of course, his wife shotgunning a beer after the race, which we have got a picture confirmation that did indeed happen on the front stretch after the race.
Excellent. Oh, my gosh.
Caitlin Larson, very known for her ability to shotgun beers very well.
And that's an important thing to when you're looking for a wife. That's important to have one who's that skilled.
I was going to say he absolutely found a winner with her. But as you mentioned, seems like redemption for him, because again, he was on his way to having a top 5 in the 500 if he didn't speed on pit road in that last cycle of green flag stops, and just drove a masterful race on Sunday. Passing was really, really hard, as it often is with stock cars at the Brickyard, but with the leaders having to save fuel, he just put foot to the floor, passed more cars than I think anybody did the entire day, put himself in position when those late restarts happened to make the move to, again, take the lead at the very end and be able to hold off Blaney and the bunch for the win.
Yeah, it was masterful for sure, and I would love to see the stats of how many cars he actually did pass, because it seemed like he'd kind of fall back a little, but he had the car, so no problem. And now I do think Keselowski could have given him maybe a run for his money, but again, then you have fuel strategy issues, and it was really fun to watch. It was absolutely fun to watch. It
absolutely was. Now I'll say this, and I'm as big of a Larson fan as they come. I did feel a little conflicted with how the race ended. Ryan Preece ends up crashing on the backstretch with 2 laps to go. As we know with NASCAR, when you have the white flag come out, the next flag ends the race, whether it be the checker flag or the caution, and they did hold the flag, wanting to see if Preece was going to be able to get it going. But I think we all saw the damage that he had. There was no way he was going to be able to limp around or keep going.
Light.
Yeah, so we didn't get a chance for having another restart, and I'm not tinfoil hat guy. I don't dive into conspiracies, but a lot of people say, oh, well NASCAR handed Larson the win or whatever it may be. And again, that's the only thing about this where I didn't feel great is that probably should have been another restart. Probably would have still been able to hold him off and win the race, but I do hate when races I do hate when races end in controversial fashion.
I do too. Yeah, I'd rather never see a race finish on a caution. And so I think he did have a missed opportunity for sure to be able to actually show that he could win the race. And I know that had to be frustrating with others, but a lot of controversy, which it's great to have for the sport, to have people talking about it.
Sure.
But at the same time, it's like, really?
And controversy didn't stop there with one of what ended up being that next to last restart, because it looked like, I thought Keselowski was going to have enough fuel to go all the way to the end, and they were running green, and they're getting that about down to 2 to go, and he's still going. Now I was like, I can't believe he's going to stretch his fuel this far, but Keselowski's really good at saving fuel. So the caution comes out, they have that restart, and literally as they were coming up to the restart zone, Keselowski realizes he's out of gas, has stuck onto pit road, and that allows Larson, who's lined up behind him, to move up to the front row, as Blaney becomes the leader, but is still on the outside, which isn't his preferred lane. And I understand the frustration of Blaney in that moment, because, yes, you're in a less than advantageous spot being on the outside opposed to the inside, but that's just kind of dumb luck, in my opinion. You can, especially with everybody being low on fuel, you can't say, all right, bring the pace car back out. You got to run at least 2 more laps, till everybody re-choose, and then you're just that. You can't do something like that. Yes, it sucks that Keselowski pulled off the last second. You didn't give your option of having the bottom on the front row, but sometimes things just happen.
I agree with you on that. I think it was a case where I know that's what he preferred. And, could Keselowski's team have maybe figured that out a little bit sooner? Like, there's just no way. But again, at the end of the day, it's dumb because they're all just in those fractions. It's such a all but microscopic thing as far as the fuel goes, and the fuel, the cells. What are they? I'm drawing a blank on the name. Where basically they fill up. It actually helps them more if they're in a banking track, because then it'll dump one of them into the other. But but then again, the calculations sometimes are such that we aren't sure we can make it. But they'll find out and they can eke a little bit more out. So
And again, if the race would have run green to the end, Keselowski probably would have had enough to hang on to the win. And again, passing was really hard, so I didn't see Keselowski or Larson getting by him there. But again, the caution comes out, extended the race for for a couple extra laps there, which was just not enough for him to be able to hang on and stay out there. All in all, controversy aside, it just felt so good to be back on the oval again.
I agree.
I was in the camp of people a couple years ago because, look, the Indy Oval race for NASCAR has never been the most compelling. It's never been the most exciting, and I was okay with trying the road course.
Right.
But after doing it for a couple of years, I'm just like, this isn't the same. This isn't it. The interest wasn't there as much. You got to get back on the oval, regardless of how good or bad the race was.
Yeah.
The prestige of racing at the most famous racetrack in the world, where IndyCar has been making history for over 100 years, you got to keep doing that.
And I think having it be, that was their opportunity, the 30th anniversary of running there, then it's like, okay, that makes sense. We can go ahead and we can make that change. So I think the timing just worked out really well for them. But and I'll get back on the Rowdy bandwagon for a second. Bless his heart. Can he just? I mean, we talked before, like how many other unlucky things can happen, and people are just like screaming at LaJoy.
I was texting with my buddy, and we've almost got kind of this running joke when it comes to whatever happens with Kyle Busch and how he's going to hurt himself after the race for the damage for whatever happened that day. Last week, I was like, oh, he's going to go jump off the top of a Pocono mountain. And this week is like, he's probably going to club himself with one of those bricks and he was in position to have a top 10, which again, it's not a win, but with how bad that team's been going, that, it's something. And once again, just gets caught up in a mess, not of his own doing, with one of those late race wrecks. And he ends up, where did he finish? 25th.
Yeah, just like unbelievable. And I feel bad because, but aside from a win, he's not getting in the playoffs. And I mean, how unusual, that just is crazy for him not to be. And really, short track, so probably Richmond's his best shot.
And it's not that Kyle Busch has forgotten how to drive and forgotten how to win. He's just with a team that has subpar equipment. I mean, go back to the Andy Petrie thing a couple weeks ago. Andy Petrie doesn't just up and retire out of nowhere.
Right.
There was a lot of turmoil going on there within that organization that doesn't look to be getting any better. I mean, Austin Dillon's not running that much better than, Kyle Busch is.
No.
They just have an RCR problem, and I know there was a lot of optimism.
Last year was better.
It was better. In the first half of last year, he won 3 races, and we're thinking, man, this is a championship-level team. Put him in my Final Four for this year. That's obviously not going to happen, but, it's not a Kyle Busch problem. It's a RCR problem. And really, the funny thing about RCR, so, Dale Earnhardt, one of the greatest drivers of all time. Kevin Harvick comes along after that. I think they really masked a lot of the inefficiencies that team had, because outside of those two, RCR hasn't had a lot of success. They've not been a perennial powerhouse team like the Hendricks and the Gibbs and stuff like that. If you don't have an elite level driver with you, they're not successful. And even Kyle Busch, an elite level driver, can't pull this team out of the mud this year.
I think it's definitely, I think, a team in decline, and especially when you see competition directors leaving, it starts to make you think, something needs to be revisited. And we talked about his contract, I think last week. It's like, I'm just really curious what happens and what opportunities are available for him.
I have a theory. So speaking of Corey LaJoy, who's at Spire, who's going to get Rodney Childers as a crew chief, which I think Rodney Childers is the best crew chief since Chad Knaus retired. And LaJoy's been underperforming a lot this year. If next year doesn't go well with a great crew chief, I wouldn't be shocked if Kyle Busch was in the Spire number 7 in 2026. That's my theory.
That's an interesting thought. And actually, that could be really good for him, and maybe sooner rather than later.
You pair up Kyle Busch with Rodney Childers. That's a lot of wins and championships, in my opinion.
No kidding.
So that's just my thought. I don't know if it's going to happen or not, but something I'm going to keep my eye on.
I think that's solid.
For RCR, I don't think they're the one program that I think is very welcoming of this 2-week break, because they're just trying to figure something out.
Yeah, and
see
I
if
don't
they can
think
get back to victory lane before
they're
the
not taking a
playoff
break.
starts. No, not at all. It's going to be nose to the grind over the next couple weeks. It's an interesting dynamic, and we have the Olympics on USA Network right now, which is why NASCAR's doing this, because NBC covers the second half of the season, and they're going to be wall to wall at the Olympics for the next 2 weeks. I do think it is nice to sometimes get a breath of fresh air before you make the stretch run to the playoffs and obviously make the run for the championship. It's just going to be a long 2 weeks until we see the Richmond race come back. For us, yes.
It'll be very short for some of the other teams like RCR. But, for us, because it's like, doggone, we're always week to week to week, so I'm going to miss it for 2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no Xfinity, no trucks, nothing like that. Like, it's purely off, and no SRX this year to kind of fill that gap a little bit, which would have been perfect. But unfortunately, that's not going to be the case this year. So
we need to start our own series.
Yeah, we do. Do you have the funding for it? I certainly don't.
I don't, but we'll see what we can do. We'll hit up Terry.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we'll explore some private equity or something like that. See if we can get our own 1 to 75 game racing series going. But we'll have a couple weeks off, and then we'll reassess things as we get Richmond back for a couple weeks from now and get set for the playoffs.
I'm looking forward to it, man. 4 races to go.
Absolutely. She's Jen Jensen from the early game. I'm Tyler Head. It is the Extra Point. Come back and wrap up hour number 2 here on your Wednesday on the game. Welcome back in. It's the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Wednesday here on the game. We've talked about a lot of things over the course of these past couple of hours here. One thing that I started off the show was asking you what your definition of success for Lenore Sellers would be in year number one as a starting quarterback here at South Carolina. And again, that could be a stat line. That could be, winning a certain game. That could be just looking like a leader on the field, whatever it may be. What's your definition of success for Sellers in his first year as a starter? Nameless Texter weighs in and says, it's maybe too general, but I think having a 3-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio and keeping the Gamecocks in the positive category in turnovers, this will help the defense and will show that he's controlling the ball, being productive as well, and being smart with football. Very good, good definition of success there. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to go out there and throw for 3,000 yards or, run for another 1,000 or whatever it may be, but just playing smart football, taking care of the ball, not turning the ball over, which again, that can, for as good and talented as players you may be, if you can't hang on to the football and you're routinely giving back to the other team, well, your team's going to have a lot of trouble, finding success. Let's see. David says if Sellers makes it to the end of the season, that in and of itself would be a major success. Running for his life against the likes of Alabama, LSU, and Oklahoma is going to be quite challenging. That is something you do have to worry about, especially when you have a mobile quarterback that is going to be taking hits, that is going to be getting tackled a lot from the type of plays that he's going to be running, is his overall health. And again, he's got a good frame. He's got the body to be that type of quarterback. How well does he hold up? How well does the offensive line protect for him? That's going to be, something that you're going to hold your breath on a little bit, especially with the amount of hits that he's going to be taking. And yeah, going up against the pass rushes at places like Alabama and Oklahoma. I don't know if LSU is going to be as difficult, but Ole Miss, teams like that, is definitely going to be something that hopefully Sellers can make it through the season completely healthy, and we don't have to worry about anything going on with that. I also talked a little bit about the Rose Bowl earlier on this hour and their request to keep their traditional January the 1st date, which again kind of throws off the cycle of what these New Year's Six games were supposed to be in the new era of the college football playoff. Jeff weighs in, says remove all bowl sites from playoff, home field, higher seeds, no buys, no need to hang on to antiquated bowl games as a part of the playoff system. You're not wrong. And I do think once we get to eventually 16, we're going to do away with buys. That way, top seeds can have home fields, at least in that first round. The problem is, and I've said this before, if we were creating a 12-team college football playoff from complete scratch and we didn't have to worry about any traditions or things that have gone on with college football for the first 150 some odd years of their existence, the bowls wouldn't be a thing. We would not worry about what the bowls were. We would literally have, okay, you're the higher seed, you get the home playoff game in the first round, the quarterfinals, semifinals, and then we have a neutral site national championship game. But because the bowl's been around for so long, because there's so much money tied up in the bowls from the sponsorship, from the host cities, all this kind of stuff, the bowl system as a whole always has to be involved with what's going on with determining the national champion. And look, I love bowl games. I've always loved bowl games. Even in today's age of them being as devalued as they are, I still enjoy watching bowl games. I still understand, though, that they're not necessary for the way we determine a national champion. Because, again, bowl games used to be the end-all, be-all destination at the end of the year. Back when we were determining the champion with polls and all that kind of stuff, you went to a bowl game as your reward for playing a good season, and back then there weren't nearly as many of them, so getting to a bowl game was a huge accomplishment. And if you were a team like Michigan, you got to go down to South Florida and play in the Orange Bowl, or you got to go out to Pasadena and play in the Rose Bowl against a team that you otherwise wouldn't see. But with so much crossover and non-conference scheduling and, especially now in the playoff era, like there's no unique matchups really that happen. The value of what a bowl game is just a stepping stone now. Doesn't matter. We get players that, opt out of these games or transfer before the games. And again, there's some value to the playoff bowls being the fact that they are a step to the national championship, but that's all that they are, is a step. It used to be your destination. You went to a bowl game and that was it. Now it's just a part of trying to get to the national championship because that's a greater prize. But again, with everything that's tied up in the bowls, they always have to exist in some way because as college football, we can't let those things just disappear, or there are people in charge that won't let those things disappear. So you just have to wait to kind of circumvent and make them fit into whatever you're doing. And again, it gets kind of clunky at the end of the day, because I look at this 12-team format and just the sheer amount of travel that you're asking a fan base to do over the course of a couple of weeks. Because if you're a fan, you want to be able to experience everything, right? And let's say you're dead set and determined, I want to go to every single round of the playoffs because I think that my team is going to be able to win the national championship. So, okay, you might have a home playoff game, but after that, maybe you're going to Atlanta for the Peach Bowl. And then, all right, well, now we got to fly out to Dallas for the Cotton Bowl. Okay, well, then we're back to Atlanta for the national championship. And it's so much crisscrossing around the country that you're really asking a lot of these fan bases to have to do this amount of travel, as opposed to saying, hey, as a top seed, I get 3 home games if I keep winning, and then we go somewhere neutral for a national championship. That would make the most sense to me. But again, we are way past that making sense mark when it comes to college football, because we always have to find a way to make sure the bowls fit within whatever we're doing here. And this is another example where, again, the Rose Bowl is willingly giving up its spot as a semifinal because it cares so much about that prestigious January the 1st date and the 5 o'clock kickoff. That means forever going forward, the Sugar Bowl quarterfinal game, or whatever the quarterfinal game going on after the Rose Bowl, is going to be a 9:30 kick, and we're going to be up very, very late watching, when most of us end up having to have to go back to work the next day. So the Rose Bowl always finds things to just screw up whatever's going on in the greater scheme of how the national championship is determined, and it doesn't seem like that's going to change even with the 12-team format where they were supposed to be a part of the rotation for the semifinals. That'll do it for today's edition of The Extra Point. Coming up next, it is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Myself, Chris, and Wes making his triumphant return on this Wednesday here on The Game.
All right, our friends over at Integrated Media can help take your home to the next level. If you've been playing the new college football game like Wes, and we will find out, by the way, during the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, did he take his console on the beach? Did he have Integrated Media come down to the beach and set his things up for him? I don't know the answer to that, but they have been to Wes's home, and they've been to my home, and they can come to yours as well. Can help you with all of your audio-visual needs, whatever you may need, whether you need something like a new TV and you need it mounted. They can source the equipment for you right here locally. You don't have to use the big box stores. And then they can install it. They do a great job, professional installations, TV, security, and cameras. If you want to trick out your man cave, if you want Sonos wireless speakers or a new sound bar, or if you want to make sure your internet signal is outstanding throughout your home, they can do it for you. IntegratedMediaInc.com, or give Michael and Nathan a call, 803-948-8327, Integrated Media.
11 o'clock, welcome in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. Tyler head Chris Clark, Wes Mitchell making his triumphant return.
This thing on?
A little bit tanner.
Tanner and fatter. That's how I feel right now.
That's what vacations are for.
When you sit on the beach and don't care what you eat for about 5 days straight.
That's part of it.
Play a little spike ball. It was a good time. Glad to be back, though. Guys, I don't know what the countdown is on. Do you know what the countdown is on?
Today is 37 days.
We're in the
37
30s.
days. Yep.
I mean, it's here.
Almost.
By all intents and purposes, next week, it's here.
Now, if you believed in week 0, you'd only be 30 days away from football.
But I don't.
I know you don't.
There is, I believe, is there a Florida State Georgia Tech game
in Ireland?
You're not allowed to watch it or talk about it because it's week 0.
Guilty. Yeah, you're right. You're right. I've got
that's to be fair, that's the only one. That's like the only game that.
I mean, you got some filler games that are like, hey, you can have them on in the background.
It's bad filler.
It's better than nothing. What Jacksonville State played somebody last year in week 0, and there's interest like, hey, you at least played this team later on in the year, but it wasn't great football. But football is football nonetheless.
Yeah, it's football.
So if you were about to have a steak meal. Tyler.
Okay.
I'm talking, maybe I won't give them free advertising, but
yeah,
you were going to just a South Carolina-based steakhouse.
Okay.
A certain.
Yeah. Would you even want an appetizer if the appetizer wasn't very good?
I'm a bottomless pit when it comes to eating. I will take the appetizer.
No. If you're going out, and I'm certainly not saying this place would have bad appetizers because all the food is actually fantastic, but I'm just saying in general, if I was going somewhere like that, which is what week 1 is for all of us. Week 1 is whatever your favorite cut of steak is, cooked perfectly with all the sides, maybe some bread. I'm not going to, McDonald's beforehand for an appetizer. I want the full on, the real thing, the real meal. And that's what week 1 is. Week 0 is preseason football. It doesn't, unless your team is playing, which actually would be kind of cool.
So you'd be fine with it if Carolina was playing in week 0.
Well, yeah, because then you have something to dive into, to talk about, to dissect. These other games, it's a cheap knockoff. It's not real opening weekend.
Perennial week 0 hater Wes Mitchell making his return after a week off.
Yeah, what would you do if we were coming in here and Carolina had a week 0 game?
Well, then it would exist at that point. You know what I do kind of miss is the Thursday kickoff for Carolina.
I know.
Those were fun.
Like the NC State versus South Carolina on a Thursday night.
There was some pretty good little matchups. The beauty of that, especially either for a fan or media standpoint, you get to go ahead and knock that thing out on Thursday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As a fan, you're going, you're tailgate, you're hopefully getting off work a little bit early. You're going out there. You're getting to watch the full game, no distractions. Media standpoint, you're getting your work in. Go ahead, do your breakdowns, all that stuff. Then Saturday, you're free.
It's the best feeling.
Like you're watching. It's an extra bye week, and for South Carolina, it always made a lot of sense when they would have like Georgia week 2, 2 extra days. You get to rest a little bit extra. You get to put in a little extra game planning for Tyler's Bulldogs, and
they always got some players suspended at the beginning of the year.
And that's why that game was so difficult in week number 2 for Georgia for all those years, because Carolina had 9 days off before then.
Well, I don't know if that was the reason, Tyler. But I liked it.
Conspiracy theory from Tyler.
We do get some Thursday games this year. You'll get Arkansas Pine Bluff at Arkansas. Now, if Pine Bluff wins that game, there will be no Uncle Sam coaching week number 2. I think we can confidently say that.
You think has a coach ever been fired after week 1?
I think it could start here. If you lose to Arkansas Pine Bluff, because he's already on the red hot seat at this point in time. Then you get Murray State taking on Missouri. That'll be the SEC Network game. So you do get games every single day leading into Saturday. Friday night, you get Temple and Oklahoma. Yes, obviously the Carolina connection there with the Murray State. And then you get the full weekend of games as well.
We got the Fighting Jody Wrights.
That's right. Fighting Jody Wrights going in there to take on Mr. Punchable Face himself, Eli Drinkwitz.
Anybody picking Murray State in that game? That would be funny.
That would be awesome.
All that, and we talked to the guy from Power Mizzou yesterday, all that momentum, all the hype around Missouri this year, they lost to Murray State in week number 1. Just undoing all that, potentially losing any chance of making the college football playoff in week number 1. Ooh, that'd be tough.
Actually, I want a Murray State shirt, and I want a University at Buffalo shirt.
Do you know what the mascot for Murray State is?
Of course, the Racers.
There you go.
Go Racers. Jody Wright voice.
I miss Jody. Good dude.
Yeah, he is.
Hilarious. Yeah, what did I miss, guys? What are we talking about today?
What did you miss? It's been a week.
I don't think it's as much of what you missed as just
y'all missed me.
Well, obviously, but just what is coming up. I mean, we're 37 days away. I mean,
38 days.
38 days away from football, like a game, but we also are way closer than that to fall camp starting. I mean, right at the beginning of August, we'll have that.
Got our last chance to hear from Beamer tomorrow before fall camp.
Little birdies with Beamer action. Malik Clark commits tomorrow.
A lot of things
Wes
happening.
and I were talking about that earlier.
Oh, we also uncovered the mystery yesterday that Juju McDowell is not in EA College Football 25. Did you stumble across this?
What's the mystery?
I didn't realize he wasn't in the game.
Why is he not?
Why is he not in the game? We didn't think anybody had opted out, but maybe he did.
And they have a stand-in. It's a stand-in for him or another running back.
But they made it very specific to not have any kind of similar attributes.
What was his name? Like
Simon McAllister.
Should have made it Simon Cowell. That would have been funny. It's kind of like McDowell.
Now, he is a shorter guy, and he is returning kicks, so you know he's supposed to be Juju, but he's a sophomore.
He's a sophomore.
The number's different. Obviously, the name's different, except for the Mick at the beginning of it. But they made sure.
They were like, we ain't playing around with this.
We're not messing around with this. Not again.
This is not.
And by the way, I looked up. There is no Simon McAllister anywhere on the internet related
on the
to
planet.
Football. Like
so they went that far.
I couldn't even find like a D3 guy with the same name.
That way, if somebody actually like transferred to South Carolina who was named that and then claimed,
they wouldn't
you put
have
me
a
in the
case.
game. Yeah.
I do love the old like Tebow. Like the Lentz, they really pushed the envelope if you look back.
It's amazing to think, like, how did they get away from this for so long? And especially with the advent of Wi-Fi and all that kind of stuff, when, like, roster sharing became a thing, why didn't they just go completely generic and let people make the rosters themselves? And they could have avoided not all the litigation, but at least some of it.
Yeah, true. I mean, Clowney was in the last game, I think, and it was, very clearly
He's defensive end number 7.
Jadeveon Clowney. Best player in the game, I think, or he was way up there. But, Tyler, have you given your review on air? Or
I have no complaints about the game. I've loved it. I'm still getting used to the playing style of it. I had to go back to classic passing. The revamp's a little...
Tyler.
Little too new for me.
So, I tried to think about... And I think most people that are getting the game have already bought it, so... I don't know if we have to, except for Chris Clark, except for, maybe a few people out there. I don't know if we have to sell the game to them, but I tried to think about it from like a South Carolina perspective. What would people want to know? Did they get things right for South Carolina? Did they get things wrong? I would say for the most part, they got most of it right on a South Carolina standpoint. Williams-Brice Stadium looks phenomenal. Like there are a few little things that need to be tweaked.
They have a patch coming up that's supposed to address some of those kind of things.
Like I don't know how you get the towel color wrong.
Yeah,
like that's just
weird.
That feels like a very silly, easy mistake, like easy fix. I don't know how you got that wrong. I think that was maybe that Clemson guy that's on the dev team. Maybe that was
his one shot.
That was his shot at Carolina. There's some things with the roster that I think are a little off. Like you have pretty much all of several of South Carolina's edge guys are listed as like linebackers on there. So there's some things with the roster that I really felt like with having real players this year that they would get right, because they have a true likeness to go off of in terms of how somebody not just looks, but how they're used in real life, and maybe making it a little bit more accurate within the game. But all things considered, like if you played this game when you were a kid, or when you were in high school, or when you were in college, whatever age group you're in, and you loved it then, I think you absolutely, like, even if you're not a gamer anymore and you've kind of been thinking about, should I go get it or should I not, it's probably worth it to go get it. Like, it's really fun. I feel like there's actually some depth to all the different things you can do, even within, like, just the gameplay.
Yeah.
And so if you want to play it in a very basic way, you can. If you want to play it where you're literally hot routing every single receiver and trying to attack different defenses and pre-snap reads and all that stuff, then you can do it that way as well. So I think if you are a college football video game fan, you absolutely you already have it, I'm guessing, but totally. you should go get it.
What difficulty are you playing on?
All-American.
Okay, that's the Heisman is.
Where are you on?
I'm still an All-American too. The Heisman is just ungodly difficult this year.
Well, and so All-American is what it defaults to for online as well. I've always thought All-American level was the most true way to play. Like, even in the old ones, when I got to where I could play on Heisman just wasn't very realistic, I feel like. It's almost like the game cheats you in order to be, quote, difficult.
Right, like the defenses are impossible to
they're cheating.
Past. Yeah.
And All-American, I feel like, is the more
go back and forth. Makes it fun.
Yeah, I think it's more kind of accurate in terms of how it plays out.
Now, did you have a ceremonial moment when you started the game for the first time?
No, I just fired that thing up. And
I took a delay of game on the first play.
No, you did.
Just in reference to honor the 11 years we had without the game.
That's fantastic.
I did inside zone.
There you go.
Rocket Sanders.
How many go routes to Nick have you thrown so far?
I don't do all that cheese stuff.
No.
I'm trying to play it the real way.
But I mean, shouldn't you throw a go route to Nick Carver?
Not if they're sitting back in zone.
You've had no opportunities to throw it.
I mean, I probably hit one or something.
Okay. I was just curious.
But if they're dropping the coverage back, Chris, you gotta.
Yeah, you gotta take what they give
what's
you.
there.
Yeah, you gotta take what's there. Do press conferences after the game.
He's got his visor, the polo, the headset, the whole 9 yards, like he's the OC.
I didn't know if you were gonna say that was you were playing with South Carolina and you were doing a tribute to Spurrier with the delay of game, because Carolina used to like to open up with would like to open the game with a delay of game or two sometimes.
Was that the Auburn?
Or take a timeout immediately?
The Auburn game?
It seems like that happened
There was
a lot,
one where the Auburn game in 2005 when Hefner had to start.
Yeah, that was I
think they had to take 2 timeouts.
All you can do is laugh. It's funny now.
Anyway,
it was not
I think
funny
we probably
at the time.
need to hit a break.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. Well, what's not funny is the pressure that Billy Napier is facing down in Florida, as we don't know what his job security is as this year goes along. We'll talk to Nick De La Torre from Gators Online coming up next. Get insight into what's happening down in Gainesville as the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs rolls along on your Wednesday on the game.
If you are looking for a reliable, local, family-owned company to help you out with your HVAC needs, reach out to Justin Krantz and his team at Krantz Cooling and Heating. That's Krantz with a K, cooling with a K, KrentzCooling.com or 803-672-3224. Now, whatever your HVAC needs may be, if you're looking at getting a new system, if you're just looking for preventative maintenance because you're hoping and praying that it doesn't go out in the middle of the summer, they can help you out with that. They can install your new AC unit. They can repair it. They can do heating, ductless AC, indoor air quality testing and service, and commercial HVAC needs. They can handle it all for you. Again, KrentzCooling.com or 803-672-3224. Since 1983, Krentz Cooling and Heating is a family-owned and operated local business right here in the Midlands. Give them a call today, 803-672-3224. That's Krentz Cooling and Heating.
Welcome back in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs, Towerhead, West Milcher. Chris Clark along with you here on the game, kind of bouncing around the SEC a little bit, getting some insight from the other programs around the conference. Yesterday we talked with our guy out at Power Mizzou about what's happening with the Missouri Tigers. Today we check in with Nick De La Torre from Gators Online, getting some insight into what's happening down in Gainesville. Nick, first of all, appreciate your time this morning. The narrative around this team, and it was a lot of the conversation last week at Media Days, was obviously the tough schedule. Obviously, you know, Billy Napier and his job security. What's the reason for optimism in Gainesville? What are people excited about for this upcoming season?
Yeah, I think you start with probably Graham Mertz, and this time last year there were a ton of question marks about him. But when you look at the success transfer portal quarterbacks have had in their second year, Joe Burrow, Kyler Murray, to name two, I think there's a lot of excitement, I guess, about Graham, whereas last year almost anger of why are you going to Wisconsin to get a quarterback. But I think Graham has proven himself to Florida fans, and I think getting him back, the transfer portal moves that they made to help him with Elijah Badger, Chimere Dike, and then a ton of changes, 13 new players and 3 new coaches on the defensive side of the ball, because as much as we talk about Billy Napier and his play calling, it was really the defense that let the team down the last month of the season.
Hey, Nick, it's Wes. Good to hear from you, man. Hope you're doing well. By the way, if you're listening, everybody go check out Gators Online. If you have a Gamecock Central subscription, you can read all their content as well. Nick, I was just reading your best and worst case scenario for Florida for this season. Let's bounce off that a little bit, man. If you were kind of have to circle one key for this team, and I know there'll be several going into any season, but what are maybe the 1 or 2 things that could be the difference for Florida that you say, if this happens, it could be a better than expected season, but if it doesn't, it could be a worse than expected season?
Oh, man. A ton of things can happen. I think the first game, it's not an SEC game, but Florida-Miami is a traditional rivalry. It used to be a yearly rivalry. They don't really play too often anymore. But to me, both teams are trying to sell hope. Mario Cristobal, Billy Napier were hired the same year. They're both under 500. Florida's at home. I don't know where the team, when you work all offseason, you start to build this belief through workouts and OTAs, and then if you lose at home to a rival, you might start thinking, well, maybe we aren't ready. And then you start getting doubts creep in. And when you look at Florida's schedule, I think they need to start strong. So right opening weekend, I think you need to beat Miami to build some confidence and kind of set the tone for your season. But then, I mean, just go through the schedule. There's a number of games. I think UCF is a team that people aren't really paying attention to, but they have a great backfield. KJ Jefferson transferred from Arkansas. And then that last leg of the season, I think in my ceiling prediction, LSU lost the number 2 overall player and 2 first-round receivers. You get them at home. Ole Miss, I think, is kind of gone like the mercenary route, trying to win it all this year or get into the playoff this year, spending a bunch in the transfer portal. If their season isn't lending itself to being a playoff contender, what kind of Ole Miss team shows up? And then Florida State lost 10 guys to the draft. So brand names all over the schedule, but maybe it's not as difficult as we've been talking about all offseason.
Nick, Chris Clark here. So Billy Napier obviously just wrapped up, as the other SEC coaches did, his time at Media Days. And, we talked about this a little bit on the show last week. I thought some of his comments were interesting. We know he's a process-oriented guy, but it's going into year 3. It's Florida, where people want to win, and they honestly want to win a specific way, I think, in a specific style, Gators fans do. And Billy Napier spent some time talking more about the process, talking about putting a staff together. How are those types of comments landing among Gators fans instead of just talking about, hey, we're going to get this thing turned around right now?
I think initially, anger, that kind of became the quote of the day when Florida was on the stage. But if you peel it back a little bit, obviously he's not saying 11 and 14 is on schedule. That's where we want to be. I think when he got hired, NIL just became legal in Florida, and then nobody knew how to deal with it. They didn't want really to build their team through the transfer portal, which if you look at Florida State, which all Florida fans do, that Mike Norvell done so well, and it's accelerated the turnaround for the Noles. So Florida fans are kind of looking and saying, well, why didn't we do that? I think when Billy said we're on schedule, they've figured out the NIL piece. They've figured out the structure, who needs to be doing what, and they've kind of changed the culture a little bit after it had been lost in the last 18 or so months with Dan Mullen. So I get the anger because they're 11 and 14. They've lost 5 in a row, so that doesn't seem on schedule. But I think he was talking more about everything behind the scenes, which will, in his mind, allow them to play cleaner, faster, better football.
And talking to Nick DeLatorre from Gators Online, go back to what you said a moment ago with, Graham Mertz coming back for another year. Extremely efficient year for him last year. Did a good job taking care of the ball. Had one of the best completion percentages in the entire country. Gets back most of his compliments at receiver as well as tight end, only losing Ricky Pearsall to the draft. I look at Eugene Wilson and Arliss Boardingham, two guys that were very important in their first years as starters at Florida. Which one of those two guys is expected to maybe take an even bigger step forward in this upcoming year?
Yeah, I think Eugene Wilson, I followed Billy Napier around during his spring speaking tour, and he told a couple of those rooms, we're going to wear Eugene Wilson out. He's kind of a player that you figure out a way to get him the ball in space, and they did a bunch of jet sweeps with him that way. But it's also, I think, Florida's added other pieces. They lose Trevor Etienne, but you gain Jaden Baugh, Katie Daniels. I like Florida's running back room even without Etienne. And then you get Elijah Badger from Arizona State and Shamiri Dike, who was on the scout team at Wisconsin with Graham Mertz. So they have thrown thousands of passes to each other, and that was pretty evident right away when the connection in spring. So I think Eugene Wilson is the go-to guy, but before Florida went into the transfer portal, I kind of likened it to 2020 Florida when you had Kyle Pitts and Kadarius Toney. Kyle Pitts goes down with a concussion, and now all of a sudden it's a lot easier to slow down Kadarius Toney because you don't have someone else taking your attention. So I thought Florida was in danger of that with Eugene Wilson, but I think they've added pieces around him, which will help all three of them.
Nick, last couple minutes here with you, and this is going a little bit off of the question that Wes asked earlier, and I know it's a moving target. It always depends on a variety of circumstances, but you laid out your best case, your worst case scenario. Is there any, number that you can point to from a wins-losses perspective that, hey, Billy Napier survives if Florida does this season, or if Florida, drops this many games, he probably doesn't survive? Can you boil it down that simply or not?
I think you have to go 500 and go to a bowl game, but I don't know that there's a ultimatum number because you can go 7-5 and that's an improvement. But what if those 5 losses are blowouts to Georgia, Texas, FSU, LSU, and Miami? No one feels good about that. That doesn't show progress. You can go 6-6, but play those 6 games tight and look competitive against Georgia. They've lost by 20-plus each of the last 2 seasons. So I think it's more so what the numbers look like than the numbers themselves, if that makes sense.
Hey, Nick, we've got about 60 seconds here. What can you tell us about what you've heard so far about DJ Lagway, of course, #1 quarterback in the last recruiting class?
Yeah, he's the future. It's really interesting. It almost feels like Tennessee last year when they had with their quarterback situation. DJ's the future. Everyone's excited about him, but it's Graham Mertz's team. Graham Mertz will be the starter. I think the most interesting part, though, is that Graham, because he's older, isn't worried about losing his job, has kind of taken DJ under his wing and is helping him grow. And I think the best thing that happened for DJ Lagway is Graham Mertz deciding to come back to school. But, yeah, he's an exciting player. Certainly one of the first guys you would send off the bus. Certainly looks the part.
Again, Nick DeLatorre from Gators Online. Appreciate your time this morning, and I think the entire conference is going to be keeping an eye on what's happening down in Gainesville this year.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
All right. We'll come back and continue on with today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Do want to quickly remind you, though, the Ultimate Season Ticket Giveaway makes its return this Monday, July the 29th. Your chance to win tickets to every home football game, baseball game, men's and women's basketball game for the upcoming sports calendar year. Go online to 1075thegame.com starting this Monday for your chance to win the Ultimate Season Ticket Giveaway, brought to you by our friends over at the Men's Clinic. Mentioned Malik Clark a little bit earlier. We'll dive into his announcement coming up tomorrow next. The Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
Another giveaway that we got going on tomorrow will be out at Firehouse Subs, right across from Lexington Medical Center. That's 2805B Sunset Boulevard in West Columbia. Again, across from Lexington Medical Center. They'll open at about 10 a.m., and you can come on in. I'm told that our guy, Dreamy Josh, will have some giveaways. Maybe some tickets, maybe some koozies, maybe some T-shirts, maybe an autograph from Wes Mitchell or Tyler Head if you want. If you want something worthless, I will give you an autograph out at Firehouse Subs. But what is worth something is they also have their delicious array of Firehouse Subs sandwiches. Come out, see us, come get one. Again, right across from Lexington Medical Center tomorrow. We'll be out there from 9 to noon hanging out. If you can't wait until then, you want a Firehouse Sub right now, use the Rapid Rescue to go. FirehouseSubs.com or download the Firehouse Subs app. That's the easiest way to order your sub online, and it's waiting on you when you get into the store. 14 Midlands locations. FirehouseSubs.com.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark along with you. As Chris mentioned there a moment ago, we are going to be out at Firehouse Subs across from Lexington Medical Center coming up tomorrow, so certainly come by and see us. Going to have some giveaways and, of course, many delicious Firehouse Subs as well. And one thing we're going to talk plenty about tomorrow as well is Malik Clark's announcement coming up at high noon tomorrow to see if he is going to join the Gamecocks and add to what has been a pretty nice little run here that South Carolina's gotten of commitments as far as, 4-star guys to appease the 3-star mafia, as we like to talk about. But Malik Clark, a very good shot at becoming a Gamecock in a little over 24 hours time.
Chris, how we feeling, man?
Vibe check.
Vibe check. Malik Clark via Chris Clark. What do we got?
Got the family connection, the inside scoop for us?
Yep. I feel pretty good about where the Gamecocks are at here. And, man, this one would be – I'm sure we'll restate this tomorrow if it ultimately goes South Carolina's way. But, this would be a significant pickup in more ways than one. This has been for a long time a battle of the Carolinas, North Carolina, South Carolina. I think in, recent days, maybe the last couple weeks, I think FSU has made a big move. But there have been a lot of positive signs for the Gamecocks. And really, you look at this thing, I know you followed this one closely too, Wes. North Carolina made a serious run to where I think they were the team to beat for a lot of this process. And so if South Carolina gets this done, it'll in some ways be a come-from-behind victory. And a kid out of Rock Hill, I mean, we all know how people feel about receivers getting out of the state and going to play for another program. You add, I think, a little bit more juice to that because it's Rock Hill, and it'd be UNC, or FSU. FSU's pulled some kids from Rock Hill back in the day as well. So, you land him in a big recruiting battle, highly contested battle. That would be a positive. But then at the end of the day, what's most important is what type of player is he? And in Malik Clark, you've got a guy who he just checks so many of the boxes as a receiver because he's got size and length. He's over 6'2", almost 6'3", 180 pounds, can run, has ball skills. Like, he really fits the bill as a high-level prospect.
Yeah, I think it hits a little bit different for South Carolina fans to lose guys from Rock Hill. Like, it really does. I mean, you can even go back to, shoot, man, you want to go old school, like Chris Hope back in the day. I believe he was Rock Hill High and, went to Florida State. And so Florida State has had some, I would say, cyclical success in the Palmetto State in general, but certainly in Rock Hill. And so, I think you look at that. I think you look at UNC, which no matter what happens on the field, and, South Carolina's had some wins over them. They've had some wins over South Carolina. Gamecock fans, I think it's kind of because the SEC thing too, and because we look at UNC as being rightfully so like a basketball school. Gamecock fans will always look at South Carolina as being superior as far as football goes to UNC. Like, that's not a recruiting battle in your state that you see yourself losing if you're South Carolina. It's just not, regardless of the data. And so, I think you look at that, and this feels like a refuse to lose kind of situation. We talked about it off air. Like Auburn, it feels like, is going this same direction with like a Jared Smith. Like, they're saying, we're gonna pull out all the stops to get this guy. South Carolina really did trail for a while for Malik Clark. And I think if they get it done, it should be an entire sort of operation, entire coaching staff should get credit, I feel like, for really all pulling in the same direction. But I think we're seeing, to give credit where it's due, Mike Furry sort of get his welcome to the SEC moments, with Lex Cyrus battling Blue Bloods there, battling North Carolina, battling Florida State for Malik Clark. And, your first battles can go one way or the other, and it certainly appears like he may get 2 big wins to start his coaching career at South Carolina, which we've talked about it, Chris. High school recruiting at that position is something Beamer specifically talked about, wanting to get more guys that you could actually get in that were he didn't say highly rated, but I think you can maybe read between the lines there, guys that everybody else wants, and guys that you can maybe keep on campus for 2, 3, 4 years as opposed to having to go transfer portal at that position. And, I think Malik, you want to talk about size, you want to talk about build. We've talked about them wanting to add size at that position. Malik Clark, to me, I watch him. He looks like a true X receiver in that he can run, but he also has some length to him. He can go get the football. He had some great times at the Under Armour camp, and those are notoriously slow times there because they do the electric timing stuff. This, if they can pull it off, will be a huge get, as Chris said, for a number of reasons.
Yeah, and you look at Carolina's strategy this offseason, they obviously had to get better and much better very fast. And so what is your strategy going to be in the year 2024? It's going to be, let's go hit the transfer portal. And so they got 5 guys out of the portal, 3 of which were on campus this spring. The other 2 joined this summer. And we expect probably all 5 of those guys, maybe 4, probably 5, to factor in some form or fashion, probably multiple starters out of that group. It's fine if you go get a guy from the portal. Georgia went and got multiple guys from the portal who factored in. It's fine. But you want to, as Wes said, be able to develop guys. And that's the thing that Beamer pointed to in the offseason. He talked about development a lot. Hey, I'm not happy with where we were developing some of our younger receivers. Well, what's the easiest way to develop a guy? Go get a guy who's really, really good. That's your best path. You don't want to be taking a bunch of flyers. Well, maybe in 4 years, if we really work hard and develop this guy, he might turn into a really good player. At receiver, it's a position where you can play early, and if you're really good there, it really opens up things offensively for you. So if they can land Malik, now you've got a group that has 3 4-star guys in there, and then you've got Jaden Sellers in state. You also have, in the other 3 guys, Brian Rowe, Lex Cyrus, Jaden Sellers, you would have smaller guys, but guys that have different skill sets. Lex Cyrus can really, really run 10-4 in the 100. Malik Clark would be an outlier, a little bit of a different type of guy, but I think, like you said, Wes, the type of guy that they need.
Yeah, and Brian Rowe, this dude can leap out of the building. Like he is a special athlete. He is kind of tiny, but you take those guys if they can get open. And you look at the commitment list right now for South Carolina, and there's been a lot of talk about, is it quite on par in terms of star power with last year's class or the one before that? Maybe not. But you look at the top of this list, if you sort it by On3 industry ranking, which, of course, is the weighted average of all 4 major networks, number 1 on this list right now, Lex Cyrus, 4-star wide receiver. Number 2 on this list right now, Brian Rowe, 4-star wide receiver. If South Carolina lands Malik Clark tomorrow afternoon, he will then be the highest rated prospect on South Carolina's commit list, which would mean that the top 3 prospects in their high school class as of right now, in terms of rating, would be wide receivers.
Again, we'll talk plenty more about this tomorrow, previewing that commitment, which again is coming up tomorrow at noon for Malik Clark. And again, we're going to be out at Firehouse Subs, 2805 Sunset Boulevard in West Columbia, right across from Lexington Medical Center from 9 until noon. Also tomorrow, the game's going to be out at Birdies with Beamer from noon until 4. You can go hang out with Terry, Jay, and Elijah out there for a little bit as we wait to hear from Coach Beamer at 4 o'clock tomorrow. Posed an interesting question on 107.5 The Game's Twitter yesterday. Favorite random quarterback in South Carolina history? I'm interested to know what Wes and Chris's thoughts on this are. That's coming up. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game.
All right, guys. Lots of storms hitting the area right now. A big one last night. And our friends at Classic Roofing, they want to warn you. If a storm hits your house and maybe you've got some roof damage, let them come check it out. You don't necessarily need to file an insurance claim. Some people may tell you, hey, just file a claim. You want to make sure that you need to before you actually file a claim. Don't do it for no reason. And regardless of if you have roof damage or not, you may want some peace of mind about your roof, how much life is left. Our friends at Classic Roofing, Joe Reeder, Max Sawyer, they're going to take care of all that for you. 803-590-7870 or classicroofingsc.com. If you call that number or go to that website and hit the link, you can set up a free estimate at your home because, of course, your roof of your home, one of the most important parts. Again, hit them up right now, classicroofingsc.com, 803-590-7870.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark along with you. A reminder, this Saturday from 2 until 4, I'll be out at the Hardee's at 3852 Rosewood Drive collecting school supplies for the Richland 1 and Richland 2 school districts. Come by, drop some supplies off. If you're one of the first 100 folks to do that, you'll receive a coupon for a free 3-piece chicken strip meal from Hardee's, again, from Saturday from 2 until 4 at 3852 Rosewood Drive. So, as I mentioned a moment ago, we posed a question yesterday on 1075 The Game's Twitter. Who's your favorite random Gamecock quarterback? Now, we have to define what random is here because I feel like there are certain quarterbacks that probably can't be included on this list. Like, I don't count Rattler as like a random quarterback. See somebody I think that's pretty well known. I think we're looking for some maybe obscure names that people outside of the Carolina bubble may not be as familiar with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Who was yours, Tyler? Have you said?
Zeb Noland.
Zebulaya. This is a Murray State show today. He's
and Jalen Dickerson, DB coach at Murray State. Go Racers. I think I like. So when I think about the random, I like to pick a player that's like kind of obscure, didn't play a lot, and you probably forgot about the player, but once you see the picture and their name, you're like, oh, yeah, I remember that guy. That's like my personal criteria.
Yeah.
Y'all ready to hear mine?
Go for it.
Can't wait.
Cade Thompson.
What was Cade doing these days?
I don't know.
Did Cade start a game?
I'm not sure.
I don't think he did.
I'm not sure if he played, like, period. And so I should have checked to see that. But he signed under Spurrier. I was having a hard time. Yes, I actually did a little research for
you researched
the
this.
5th time in the history of this show. I did some research, and I could not find any stats on Cade Thompson.
Yeah,
but he is.
I'm struggling to find anything on him.
Well, he ended up transferring.
He did exist.
He transferred to Tennessee Martin. So yeah, Cade Thompson is mine. Former UNC commitment from Maryville, Tennessee, signed with Spurrier, ended up at Tennessee Martin. Don't know if he played. I'm having a hard time figuring out even how long he was on the roster. I think I broke my own kind of criteria a little bit because, like, you wanted somebody who maybe went and played. Like a great random Mississippi State quarterback is Mike Hennig. You remember him, Tyler?
Vaguely.
He played, but it was random.
You saying that for some reason just gave me one. Mike Rath.
God, that's probably the best. That's the answer.
It's a good one. You know, Mike Rath, who was I believe, JUCO quarterback edition.
Mm-hmm.
This is when I was like very, very early in my following of this stuff.
Yep.
I swear I think he was a JUCO guy. But he was the backup during, it was somewhere in that stretch of like Don Drill, Corey Jenkins. I'm trying to think. He led a game-winning touchdown drive off the bench at Kentucky.
Okay.
In one of those Lou Holtz, like low-scoring, just defensive battles. South Carolina did nothing on offense all day. Mike Rath off the bench, touchdown pass. Maybe Troy Williamson.
It was 19 yards. Good pull.
That is the perfect definition of random because you have a defining moment that people remember them for, and then probably not much else.
That was perfect.
That was it.
Well, nobody will have a better answer than Wes.
Let me give a couple of my other ones.
Okay. All right.
Got to be Perry Orth. Like got to show some love.
That was actually Steven Garcia's answer. Was Perry Orth?
Yeah. Got it. I mean, love Perry.
That's awesome.
I think he's at the beach right now. But shout out to Perry. My guy Andrew Clifford. Loved Andrew.
Yep.
Interviewed Andrew in Tampa one time. Like, actually used to know Andrew pretty well. Love Andrew. Hilarious dude. And then shout out to my guy Seth Strickland.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one.
Seth is actually a coach now as well. Believe he's rocking the Spurrier visor and is a Spurrier disciple as far as the coaching tree goes.
You actually mentioned a good one earlier, too. Antonio Hefner is a good random quarterback. I do think Mike Rath is the best. By the way, so when he did that, he was fourth string because Pinkins didn't travel, and then Savell got hurt, and then Blake Mitchell was in the game, and they benched Blake and put in Mike Rath. Yeah, 12-7 was that. I still remember being at USC and picking up the Daily Gamecock newspaper, reading about that game more. That was something else. But then the NCAA actually hosed Mike Rath because he applied for another year of eligibility after that, and they denied it. Lots of random facts.
Yeah,
it's a great random quarterback.
Knowing more about knowing about him than most random quarterbacks.
Yes.
Got some votes for Lorenzo Nunez.
Did anybody vote for Mike Rath?
I'm not seeing it here,
guys. Come on now.
Would you define Chris Smelly as random? He did start a fair amount of games.
Not random enough.
Not random enough.
All right, guys. CONNOR.
The proper way to spell Connor Shaw's name.
First of all, he's not random. He's an all-time winningest quarterback.
That doesn't define as random.
CONNOR, not ER. Just need to get that off my chest.
Yeah, there's quite a few people making that mistake. That's okay. But yes.
It's not okay.
It's Michael Scarnecchia. Got a couple votes for him as well.
Scar, yep.
Got some votes.
Great start against Missouri. Mm-hmm. So he had his moment. One of the things that maybe bothered me actually the most about the Muschamp era is that Scar never got in after that. Even in
a lot of Gamecock fans share your thoughts.
I agree with them.
What could have been. Again, we'll be back out at Firehouse Subs on Sunset in West Columbia tomorrow across the street from Lexington Medical Center from 9 until noon. Come by and see us. Coming up next, halftime show with myself, Terry Ford, here on The Game.